Welcome to the link, guys. Today we're really blessed, privileged to have with us Emmanuel Gerges, who's going to be speaking to us today about Orthodox theology, or Orthodox soteriology, the economy of salvation. The title of the talk is Dynamics of Salvation. As we mentioned earlier, this is one of, I think, the most important subjects, and it's a subject we really don't talk about. Like, what is salvation? What do we understand salvation to be? And the big question that we're oftentimes asked here living in the West is, are you saved? Well, today Emmanuel, I think, is going to give us a good breakdown of salvation, different models, and what is the Orthodox view of salvation.
Okay. Thank you, Abuna. And as Abuna said, the only good thing Abuna got out of Nashville was me, but I can't say the same about him because I also got my wife out of Nashville. So, but thank you. Okay, again, the topic of salvation is very important for the life of any Christian. However, throughout our lives we hear a lot of things, and we hear, are you saved? Or some people calling others, condemning others, you're going to hell. So how do we know where we stand? Now, in order to do so, and I'm going to jump a little bit, sometimes I'm going to have to describe other things that are happening in the world of humanity as a whole before we jump into theology. So, initially, the word economy, why do we call it economy? Economy. The word economy is in Greek, ekonomia, and this word is made of two words, ekos and nimen. Okay, ekos means a household, and nimen means efficient management. So the efficient management, or the managing a household in a sufficient way, in an efficient way, regarding the topic of salvation. Now, one has to ask, if we're talking about a household, whose household are we talking about? God or man? Any suggestions?
For the economy of salvation?
Yes. No. Well, we were in God's house. They were on the table. We were in God's house, right? We were created in His image. We were in paradise. And then we decided we want to leave, right? We don't want to be with Him anymore. Because we thought if we eat from the tree, we're going ourselves to be a god. Remember the conversation between Eve and the serpent? Once you eat from this tree, you'll become like God. So we wanted to become God in our own accord, away from God. So we created our own house. And when we created our own house, this house was a poor house. Because it was outside of God, right? So the household management, therefore, is our household. So from God's perspective, God is trying to manage our house that we have kind of shifted from His realm outside. And what are, if we're going to use, if you are a father and you have a little kid and you want to provide for that kid, what do you do in your household? Well, you use the tools that are around you. The baby is hungry, so you prepare a bottle. The baby needs a diaper change, right? So you use whatever is in your environment to manage the household efficiently. So in our household, what do we have? After the fall, after we've created our own house, what are the tools available to us in our humanity? Only two things. Only two things. Our own flesh and our language. The language and the flesh. Right? So God says, okay, I'm going to save the people. I'm going to interact with the people. And in interacting with the people, I'm going to use their tools in their household to save them. Because otherwise, we do not comprehend any other thing except what we have. So if I were to come to you and say, well, you have a baby who is crying because he's hungry, and I come to you and I say, here is a computer. How can a computer help a hungry baby? It cannot. But if I say, here is a bottle that has milk, then you can use that, right? So what we have is just language and flesh. So God uses those two. First, He uses the language, and that's why we have Scripture. So He uses our human language to communicate with us. But again, remember the definition of the word economy. It is the sufficient or efficient use of the tools. So when Scripture alone was not enough, it was not sufficient for salvation, God used the other tool, which is the incarnation. He came and took our flesh. And in taking our flesh, He has basically used everything in our household so that He can shift this house back into His presence and say, okay, here is the act of salvation. Okay. So now, in order to understand a little bit about where do we get all these other models of salvation that we hear about? Thank you. The history of Christianity has always been kind of dependent upon how man views his universe. Why? Because right after the fall, remember again the household. That's all what I have. I have my language and my flesh, I have my environment, and that's why in the earliest accounts of astronomy, even before the ancient Egyptians, we had something called this, the earth is the center of the universe, right? So the earth was the center of the universe. Why? Because that's all what we are aware of, our environment. So, and we think we are God, right? Because we ate from the tree of knowledge. So now everything is revolving around us. So in astronomy and physics, everything has been like self-centered, earth-centered. Fast forward, in 90 AD, there is an astronomer who lived in Alexandria. His name was Ptolemy. Ptolemy was an astronomer and a mathematician. And he said, no, that's not a good model, right? What is a good model is there is a dualism. There is some sort of a fraction between what is earthly and what is heavenly. Whatever is earthly is insufficient, meaning that we are prone to disease, to pain, to growth, we're so weak, we're so incomplete. But the divine realm, the spiritual realm, the heavenly realm is full, is complete. Therefore, we need to escape our reality from earth to heaven so that we are fulfilled and completed. And of course, this is where you get the early Christian heresy of Gnosticism. The Gnostics are a group of people who despised the flesh, who tortured their flesh, who wanted to die. Not because they want to be with God, but because they don't like their materiality or materialism, and they want to escape to the ethereal or the celestial, the heavenly being. They want to be spirits, not bodies. So that was the Ptolemaic astronomy. Then fast forward, then you have Newton. And in Newton, he says, no, Ptolemy was wrong. Okay, what is it? It is that whatever is earthly is verifiable. Right? I can use an equation, a mathematical calculation, a microscope, whatever it is, to verify my environment. But anything spiritual cannot be verified. And therefore, again, there's dualism, but he flipped it. So whatever is heavenly is not real. Whatever is earthly is real because it is verifiable. So in that case, what happened is, most of the scientists, most of the people who worked in the sciences said, wait a second, God cannot be verifiable, so they started becoming atheists. And this is when the first movement of scientists leaving the church were at the time of Newton. Again, because of the cosmology or the physical outlook on how we operate. And so, while the first Ptolemaic model resulted in Gnosticism, the second model resulted in the dualism of Catholicism and Protestantism. How is that possible? St. Augustine, who lived early on, he was, by the way, most people think he's Roman, like he's from Rome. No, he's actually Algerian, so he's African. But he was educated in the Ptolemaic school. He followed Ptolemy in his dualism. So it created the idea of two cities, one which is inadequate, the other is kind of complete, right? So he used the same idea of Ptolemy. And then he said, so it created, again, dualism. The entirety of the history of Catholicism takes from what Augustine wrote and starts developing the same model. So that's when you get Anselm of Canterbury, and then Thomas Aquinas, and then Luther, and so on and so forth. Finally, Einstein is born, and then in 1904, he comes and says, all of you are wrong. Why? Because there is something called the special theory of relativity. What does the special theory of relativity say? It says that if there is an event that happens at one time, it can happen in the fullest real sense again at another time. If there is an observer that sees an event happening here, another observer in a completely different time can see the same event in its full real sense. How does that affect theology? All of a sudden, the Catholic and the Protestant theology is shaken. Why? Because all of a sudden, the birth of Jesus Christ is not a historical event. It is an existential event. What does that mean? In Isaiah says that we shall be given a son and his name shall be Emmanuel. And I favor this verse because of my name. But he says, there is a prophecy, and the prophecy says, and his name shall be Emmanuel. Yet, when the little kid is born, his name shall not be Emmanuel, his name is Jesus Christ. Why? Why wasn't that prophecy fulfilled? St. Jacob of Surug answers that very eloquently. He says, because the name Emmanuel is not a name of a person. It is the name of an event. And the event is God is with us. So Jesus Christ is born, and that's an event, and when the event happens, it is continuous. It is always. That's why when in Christmas, we celebrate Nativity, we celebrate the birth of Christ, and this birth is real. We're just not saying Christ is born, glorify Him, and He's a memory. No. From that, start thinking. The liturgy. The liturgy. It is truly a body and blood of Christ. It's not a historical event. It's not a memory. It's not that He sat with His disciples and gave Himself while He was still alive. Wait a second. How can He give Himself when He's still alive? Well, it's because it's an existential event, not a historical event. Everyone following? Okay.
So you're saying it's not just
It's not just a historical. It is. So this is kind of a little background about what happened in humanity, because then our brains are ready. But based on these models, then we can form a methodology to think about salvation. Because our salvation cannot be a dualist salvation, and it cannot be an unreal salvation. It has to be both unified, not dualist, and real, not historical. there is a contemporary theologian who says, I will take questions later, and a contemporary theologian who said that the fall is not something that happened to Adam, but it is still happening to all of us. What does that statement mean? Again, that the fall was not a historical fall. We cannot look at that. I wish I was Adam because I would have chosen better than Adam did. It goes through our minds, right? But it's not. The idea of time is different. It's not a linear time when Adam sinned and then Sheth sinned and then all of them sinned. No. We all sinned. If you were the first Adam, you would have sinned. Okay? Alright, so we spoke of that. Alright, so I want to start with something very beautiful that St. Athanasius said. God has special pity for the human race, seeing that by its nature it would not be able to persist forever. That is, the human race might, as a result of transgression, return to its original nature to non-existence. And that's exactly what happened. If we continue living in our household, and then we die biologically, without salvation, we are back to non-existence, because we're outside of God, and God is the being. We say, you are the being in the liturgy, right? Okay, so what are the models that came out through the history of humanity? Now, with each of those models, before I jump into them, there are 4 questions that we need to keep in mind for every one of those models based on the cosmology that we spoke about, the physics that we spoke about. The first question is, does this model, does any of the models that will come on this screen present a change in God or a change in man? Because God is a united reality. He's never divided. We were the ones shattered. We left His household and we shattered. So if there is any dualism, it cannot apply to God. That's why He's impassible. He does not change, but we change. Right? So will the model suggest a change in God or a change in man? The second question, will it separate the Son from the Father? Because if it does, then again God is divided. It's a dualist mentality. Will it isolate the work of the cross in the work of Jesus Christ as the only work that He did for salvation? Or will it include His entire life? His incarnation, the Sermon on the Mount, the Transfiguration, the Ascension, the Baptism, everything. Right? Because if we divide His work, then we're not talking about His person. There's dualism, again, which is Protestant. And finally, will the model be an existential model or a historical model? A fake model, a sentimental model, or a real model that actually moves us from our household to the presence of God? Alright, so keep those 4 questions, because every time we speak about a model, we have to run it through those 4 questions to see if it is valid or not. So the first model is the rabbi, or the teacher, or the instructor, and this was developed by Justin Martyr and Saint Clement of Alexandria. And basically they said, just like in the Old Testament, there was always a teacher figure. So think of Saul being discipled by Gamaliel, right? So there is always a figure and everyone is following him. So salvation is just kind of following what the teacher says, right? Okay, let's run it through the list. And by the way, there is a table here where you can say if it passes or not. You can use your pencils and write if it passes or not, because then you develop something very interesting. So the teacher model, does it suggest a change in God or in us? It does not suggest any change in God. Does it separate the Son from the Father? No. There is no dualism there. Okay, does it isolate the work of Christ on the cross from any of His other works? No. But is it an existential model, or is it a sentimental model? It's sentimental. It's, oh, he's a good teacher, we'll follow him. Okay, but how did that take you from your fall and move you to paradise? It didn't. So it fails on number 4. Alright? The next model is Christus Victor. The victory, the king. The idea that Christ is a warrior and he won the war against the devil. Okay. Does it suggest a change in God or in us? In us, okay. Does it separate the Father from the Son? No, doesn't. Does it isolate the work of the cross from the rest of his work? Yes. Because if he is victor, it means that he won over the battle with devil in Hades, and then the focus is only on the cross. There is nothing else that Christ did that is of value except dying on the cross. So it fits question number 3. And question number 4, it is actually, it can pass it. You know, it's okay. All right, getting into the heavy stuff now. The ransom. The ransom, fantastic model. The ransom is developed by Augustine. And in the Orthodox world, we actually call that model the Latin heresy. It's a heresy. Okay? Why? Ransom. I'm going to, hold someone at gunpoint right now, and I'm going to demand a ransom. Okay, who is the ransom to be paid to? To me, right? So let's see. Who is paying the ransom to who? God is paying the ransom to himself. He's schizophrenic. God is paying the ransom to the devil. So he is, wait, he's not in control of the devil? So the devil is elevated now to a godly being who can negotiate. God does not negotiate with terrorists. So if the devil is a terrorist, there is no negotiation. So now he cannot pay to himself because that would separate the Son from the Father, right? He cannot pay to the devil because God does not negotiate with terrorists, and he cannot pay it to man because man is being held. So who does he pay it to? No answer.
Death.
Huh?
Death.
Death is death.
The
A
condition.
personified being that he demands. Is death a rational entity that needs a satisfaction by, you can't even finish the argument logically, right? Okay. So, how many questions does this model fail? How many questions? It fails on 3 questions.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Whomever developed this barely gets a D. Barely. Okay, so there is a change in God, because if God demands a ransom, then he's not full in himself. He's lacking. He needs a payment for something that he lost. So there is a necessity in God. Okay, so it fails. There is a separation between the Son and the Father in ransom, because now the Son is used as a ransom, meaning that he is separated from the Father, and he's not always dwelling with him, and he's not in the bosom of the Father anymore. It fails the second question. It fails also because it only focuses on the cross as the only way of salvation. It passes on account of being an existential, but that means nothing. Right? Okay. Now, sacrifice and divine satisfaction. Yay! Everyone's giving thumbs up to God. All right. Now, of course, Anselm of Canterbury is not very satisfied with Augustine's argument. Always, the student kind of always feels he needs to prove that he's better than his teacher. I don't know why, but it's embedded. And so he says, you know what? Sacrifice and divine satisfaction. What is divine satisfaction? God, who is unlimited, man who is limited, man sinned, the sin, since it was committed against the unlimited God, becomes unlimited. And God is angry. He's very angry. And now he wants to release his anger at someone. So what does he do? He sends his son, and as Billy Graham said once, as his punch bowl. So he sends his son, crucifies his son, so that he pours his wrath on the son, so that he's satisfied, so that now he will forgive humans. If this is a God, I do not want to believe in him. If this is a God who is doing that to his own begotten son, whose only begotten son, what would make me want to die and be with him? Because otherwise he's a God who is waiting with a big fat stick, in Arabic kharazana, to beat the heck out of everyone when they arrive. Right? Huh? This is disastrous. Yes. Right? And that is why people are afraid of death. Because they think if they die, they're going to someone who's going to beat them up. I don't know what Anselm was thinking. He was a sadist. The least that could be, the least that could be said about him is this. Now, you know, the other thing is the notion of sacrifice. Sacrifice has to be a self-chosen offering. If I am twisting your arm to give me something, that is not called sacrifice, that's called coercion. So basically, Christ had to have a will that sacrifice, that he wants to give himself. He wants to. Well, if he wants to and he's not coerced, and by the way, if he's coerced, he's not God, because he's not free. Right? If he's not coerced, if he wills it, then how is that satisfactory to any divine wrath? That's a contradiction. In addition, if God is angry, it means he's passible. He changes. So after you fast for 265 days a year and pray every liturgy, and then you go and meet God, he will say, sorry, I changed my mind. You know, he's unstable. That is what this model offers us. How many questions does it fill in? The first three and the last one passes. So again, out the window. All right, then what are we left with? The example. Right after Anselm develops the previous one, his student, and again remember my statement about the student wanted to be better than the teacher. His student, Pierre Abelard, he says, no, that's horrendous. I cannot view this kind of model. God saves man by example. So Christ came, he loved everyone, he made miracles, he was very humble, he prayed. So let's all follow his footsteps and we will be saved. it's not so different if you realize from the teacher, by the way. He seems to have jumped back into the earlier models. And again, if we run those questions on the model, you will realize that it passes the first three and it fails on the fourth one. Just like the very first model. Right? Okay. Now we're left with one last model. The exchange. God to man and man to God. Now, this model is not chronological in the order that I put it on the slides, meaning that this model was also in the early church. It was developed by Athanasius and by Cyril and by Gregory of Nazianzus and by everyone else. And it uses the word litron, and the idea behind litron, and this is what makes what's the word? A fight between the Orthodox and the Catholics and the Protestants is the definition of this word. Why? Language is a very weird thing. You can, when you're given a piece of text to translate it, depending on your worldview, you will choose words to translate the text in front of you, depending on your worldview. So, if your worldview is a judicial worldview where there's an angry God who demands, it's a judicial system, there's a courthouse and everything is legal, then you will translate this word as ransom. But if you come from a healthy worldview, it's an exchange. In the old system, in the old monetary systems, when I wanted this camera and you wanted my phone, there was not money. There was a system called bartering. By the way, I just learned this word literally 3 days ago from Abu Numayl. I didn't know that word, but I knew it in Arabic. But his Arabic is so good that he actually translated it. So, and that is the system that operated in the old model, in the old world. You know, I wanted your camera, you wanted my phone, let's do an exchange. Alright? So, the exchange, God gave us His divinity and He took our humanity. Okay, let's dig a little deeper into it. And how do we know that that is true? How do we know that this model is true? Well, first let's run it through the 4 questions. If there is an exchange, God gave us Himself and took our form. Does it fail on the first question? I want an answer. Yes, right? It fails. Why? Because it implies a change in God. So on prima facie grounds, superficially, it fails. We'll see how it does not fail. Okay, the second question. Does it fail on it? No. The third? No. The fourth? No. Okay. So now, how do we know? First of all, most of Europe now is exhausted by this theological dialogue that says that the concept of the exchange, God took what is ours and gave us what is His, fails on number 1. Because they think that if God exchanges with us and takes humanity, that means an addition. So there is a change in God. Does it make sense? So if God takes humanity, in other words, He added something onto Himself, which means that He was lacking something, so He added something on us, which constitutes a change in God. Alright? That's wrong. Why? Because, and we have just jumping back for a second, there is Irenaean methodology written. There's a saint called Irenaeus who lived in 180 AD, and he said, how do you know that the faith that you have received is the correct faith? How do you know? How can you verify this? So he said, by the way, who is Irenaeus? Irenaeus was the only disciple of Polycarp. Saint Polycarp. Who is Polycarp? Saint Polycarp was the only student of Saint John, the writer of the Gospel. Right? And at his time, the Gnostics came out and said, wait, Christ gave a secret knowledge to John, Peter, and Thomas, and if you want to know the truth, come to this club. The Gnostic club will give you the secret knowledge. Leave this Christianity. It's not worth it. So Irenaeus stands up and says, wait a second, you said John? Well, wait, Polycarp is the only student of John, and I'm the only student to Polycarp, and he never mentioned something like secret knowledge. So, he's like, okay, how do we know that what we receive is correct? So he says there is no Twitter, Facebook, email, fax, telex, anything. What can we do? We can compare what different cities received from the apostles, and whatever matches is the correct dogma. Whatever does not match is a heresy. And that's the foundation on which the idea of ecumenical council started. That when we hear something, Athanasius heard something going on in Alexandria, Arius was saying something he didn't like, he's like, wait. I'll send a letter to everyone, see the consensus, and if they all say that what you're saying is wrong, then you're wrong. So Irenaeus gives us that. So how can we use this? By reading the fathers and seeing what they say about the exchange. Did the exchange constitute a change in God or not? Does that make sense so far? Okay. So what does Saint Athanasius say? The Son of God became the Son of Man in order that the sons of man, the sons of Adam, might be made the sons of God. The Logos, who was begotten of the Father in heaven, in an ineffable, eternal manner, came to this earth to be born in time of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, in order that we who were born of earth might be born again of God. So now it's talking about moving from your household to his household. He took upon himself our baseness and our poverty that he might bestow on us his wealth. His passion is our impassibility. His death is our immortality. His tears are our joy. His burial, our resurrection. His baptism, our sanctification. His bruises, our glory. So wait a second. If he exchanges these things with us, if he exchanges his passion in our impassibility, it means that he gives us impassibility. But if it means that he takes instead our passion, then we became perfect and he became weak. His death is our immortality. So now we become the God fully and he becomes the created. Right? If you understand in the Western mindset. His tears are our joy, his burial, our resurrection. So wait a second, God also dies in this model. God becomes dead. Right? That is someone has something is going on wrong here, right? Okay. Let's see someone else. Saint Ephraim the Syrian. Athanasius was from Alexandria. Ephraim was from Syria. What did Ephraim say? And this is good. This is really great. He says, "Let us give thanks to God who clothed himself in the names of the body's various parts. Scriptures refer to his ears to teach us that he listens to us. It speaks of his eyes to show us he sees us. It was just the names of such things that he put on, and although in his true being there is no wrath or regret, yet he put on such names because of our weakness. Blessed is he who has appeared to our human race under so many metaphors. Metaphors. We should realize that had he put on the names of such things, it would not have been possible for him to speak with us humans. Meaning what? Think of a shirt. You go to your room, you put on a Harvard shirt. Does it define who you are? It's a Harvard shirt.
Don't put a Harvard. Yeah, don't put a Harvard.
Yes. For all what I know, it's University of St. Andrews actually. But think of it that way, right? You put a shirt, it does not define who you truly are, your true being. So Harvard, take it off, put Princeton.
Much better, much better.
So He clothed himself in language so that he might clothe us in his mode of life. He asked for our form and put this on, and then, as a father with his children, he spoke with our childish state. What does that mean? When your kid is babbling, you get on your knees and you start babbling to him. Does that make you an irrational being for doing that? No. You're still your true being. You can talk about physics and mathematics and complicated theories of relativity, but when your kid needs it, you step down and babble like he does. It doesn't take from who you are, right? Okay, what does he say? He says it is our metaphors that he put on, though he did not do literally so. He then takes them off without actually doing so. When wearing them, and he was at the same time stripped of them, he puts on one when it is beneficial, then strips it off in exchange for another. The fact that he strips off and puts on all sorts of metaphors tells us that the metaphor does not apply to his true being. That's what I just said in the example. That his being is hidden. Is hidden. Why? If we circumscribe, if we limit God in language, then he's not God anymore. Then we've wrapped our minds around him. Right? It's not fair to God. In one place he was like an old man, an ancient of days. Then again he became like a hero, a valiant warrior. In one place he was delaying, elsewhere having run he became weary. In one place he was asleep, in another in need. By every means did he weary himself so as to gain us. Meaning what? That in the Old Testament you see all these images about God. Does it constitute his true being? No. He just puts it on because your nature cannot comprehend except in that way. Okay? We'll come to this here. If someone concentrates his attention solely on the metaphors used of God's majesty, he abuses and misinterprets that majesty, and thus errs by means of those metaphors with which God had clothed himself for his benefit. And he's ungrateful to that grace which is stooped down low to the level of childishness, although it has nothing in common with him, yet grace clothed itself in his likeness in order to bring him to the likeness of God. Do not let your intellect be disturbed by mere names, for paradise has simply clothed itself in terms that are akin to you. It is not because it is impoverished that it put on your imagery. God is not lacking anything. He's not taking your humanity because there is a lack in him. But rather, your nature is far too weak to be able to attain to his greatness. And its beauties are much diminished by being depicted in the pale colors with which you are familiar. Actually, when we put God in when we refer to God in our weak terms, it never speaks of his glory. It never does. That's why there is in theology something called anthropomorphic language, which means that we attribute certain human ideas about God. Because we are wrathful, we say God is wrathful. Because we do not love, we say he might not be loving. It is our weakness, not his weakness. For this is the good one who could have forced us to please him without any trouble to himself, but instead he toiled by every means so that we might act pleasingly to him of our own free will. You know, and excuse this example, but I really, it brings the image to my mind, but it might be improper, but I think of God as having worked as a clown for our sake. He has done everything. He has jumped up and down. He has tore up the entire everything out of love to make us smile, to make us live again. And we miss the point. We miss the point. But instead, he told in every means so that we might act pleasingly to him of our own free will, that we might depict our beauty with the colors that our own free will had gathered. So, are you saved? Are you saved? Okay. And this is wrapping up. A lot of times we think in dualist models. We think of Christ from above or Christ from below. Christ from above, we stand on top of God or Christ and say, God is so nice, Christ is so nice, he will forgive all our sins. So, because you know what, he's cute and he's nice and he's gonna, you know, I'm a human being and I'm cute. so he's going to forget whatever I do, right? So we act as if we are superior to Christ. The other way, from below. Oh, God is wrathful and it's miserable. I have a miserable life and the sins I committed will never be forgiven. You know, they are horrible. And so you look at Christ from below. But Christ never looked at you from above or from below. At the fullness of time, when He decided to come and be in your image, He self-emptied. He stepped low to your level. And in His resurrection, He took you back to His household. He never looked at you as up or down. He just lived with you. He became, and He wants to live in your heart, in your mind. And that's why there is a Eucharist. That is why there is communion, because He wants to be in union with you. In Greek, He gave you the grace. Grace is charis. That's why you get charismated. Okay? You get charismated because it is the grace. And in response, you ev charis. So there is charis one way, there is ev charis the other way. He gives you the grace, you give Him the thanksgiving and partaking of His life. So the model of salvation that the church holds is one of exchange. We say this every Saturday night. He took what is ours and gave us what is His. We just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, but never understand it. And then when we're asked on campus, are you saved? We don't know how to respond. But this is how to respond. So, finally, any questions, concerns, lawsuits, tomatoes, wrong? I welcome all.
We have just a few minutes. Are there questions, just real quick?